The scripture that we're going to be looking at today is from the book of Genesis, the very first book in the Bible. And I encourage you to turn there with the Bibles that you brought with you, or with the Bibles that are there in the seats in front of you, or with whatever you use on your phone or smart type device that you use to read the Bible. Genesis is the very first book, and we're going to be in chapter 25, beginning at verse 19. And we're going to read the second half of that chapter. Right now, we're going to start the story that we're going to be looking at this summer of a man named Jacob, a really important Bible character named Jacob. And I want to place him in his context a little bit here today, and that is using our Bible timeline that all of you have. I sincerely hope. The first part of that, the first side of that, looks like this. And there's two red sections that are right next to each other. And the first red section says the patriarchs, and Jacob counts as one of those. That's referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so we're right there. So it's really pretty early in the Bible. We're talking here in about 1800 BC is this guy who we're going to be looking at here. And for the next few months, as we go through the summer, we're going to be going through the story of Jacob, which is sort of a sequel to what I did last summer. Last summer, I preached on Abraham. You might remember. I was preaching through a big chunk of Genesis, the book of Genesis, and preached about Abraham, and Jacob is Abraham's grandson. And the story of Jacob is the story of a man who is growing up. And what I mean by growing up is not just physically growing up. In fact, in what we look at here today from Genesis 25, we see him go from the womb to born to a grown man in just the span of a few verses. But we're looking at the story of a man who is not only growing up in the sense of getting bigger or becoming physically mature. We're talking about somebody who is maturing as an adult, maturing as a person, maturing as an individual, and maturing in virtue and integrity and in wisdom through the course of his adult life. The story of Jacob is the story of a man who is growing up, that is, maturing in a family. And the story of Jacob is the story of a man who grows beyond his family. It's the story of a man whose family conditioned him to live life a certain way, to approach life a certain way, to have certain ambitions, to make certain choices. But then he finds that that's not cutting it. And he's got to, in a manner of speaking, grow above his raising. He's got to find a way to mature beyond what comes naturally based on how he was raised. But it's also the story of a man who grows in his family, because Jacob can never really escape his family. And in fact, half of the book of Genesis, Jacob is alive, from Genesis 25 through Genesis 50. And every moment that Jacob appears in that entire half of this long book of the Bible, he's with a family member. He's with a brother, or his mother, or his father, or his uncle, or a wife, or a son, except for 4 times, which happen to be the 4 times that God gets him alone and talks to him with nobody else around. And over the summer, we're going to take this story up to the point that Jacob's sons take center stage in chapter 37. We're not going to get into that. Jacob continues to remain an important character for the last quarter of the book of Genesis, but he's not the main character at that point. So we're just going to get him to that point over the summer. And as we look at the story of Jacob, sometimes we're going to find lessons for ourselves as parents. Sometimes we're going to find lessons for ourselves as children, by which I'm including adult children, the adult children of parents, including parents who may have passed on. And in Jacob's life, what we'll see, as well as in our own lives, those lessons are closely intertwined. Our lessons as being children and our lessons as being parents often blend and weave together. And today we're looking at Jacob's starting point. This is the family that he had to grow in and grow beyond. And as we look at it, there may be elements that are familiar to you too. as we take this journey here through this summer of how to grow, of how to mature in and beyond our families. So the starting point here for Jacob is his grandfather, Abraham. Abraham, as we saw last summer, and as I've talked about many times, Abraham was a man who was an idol worshiper in Mesopotamia, southern Mesopotamia, what is today southern Iraq, in about 2000 BC. And God communicated with him, spoke to him, and indicated to him that he is the true and living God, and was going to use Abraham as the entry point for God to recommunicate with the world that had fallen away from him, to reintroduce himself to an entire world of people who were worshiping idols in place of the true God, out of their sin, out of their darkness, out of their ignorance, out of their willful suppression of the truth that God made them rather than the other way around. And so we talked last summer about the journey that Abraham took and what God did with him. And the key for learning about Abraham is that God gave Abraham 3 blessings that were going to be critical, 3 promises that were going to be critical for God's rescue plan of the entire human race. It was going to start real small with one guy, but then branch out to envelop the whole world, a story that all of us are still a part of today, a story that's still ongoing. The first blessing that God told Abraham that he would give him was offspring. Abraham at that time had no kids, couldn't have kids. His wife, Sarah, couldn't have kids. And God told him, I'm going to give you miraculously a child, and not only that, but that you're going to have descendants that are more than the sand on the seashore, more than the stars in the sky. You can't not even count the number of descendants that will come from you. The second promise that he gave to Abraham was the promise of land, a particular area of land in particular that was the land of Canaan, that is today on the map. You can find it with Israel and Palestine and also kind of areas around Lebanon and Syria and Jordan even a little bit, just kind of all around in there. And so God promised him, I'm going to give your descendants this land that is right here at the intersection of Europe, Asia, and Africa. This is going to be this highly vulnerable land of intense commerce and trade. This is going to be the place that is the epicenter of what I'm going to do to communicate with the world. And the third promise that he gave to Abraham was the promise of blessing. Because he said, through you and through your descendants, the entire world is going to be blessed. Now, Abraham had this miracle child named Isaac in his old age, and Isaac then inherited those 3 promises, that God was going to do those things through Isaac just as he promised through Abraham. So that is where we are here at this point as we start Genesis chapter 25 and as we look at verses 19 through 26. This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. God's statement to Rebekah that we see here in verse 23 sets the stage for the whole Jacob story. This is going to set up everything that we're going to see here. Keep in mind that the people who are listening to this story, when it's originally being told orally and then eventually got written down, are the descendants of Jacob. a nation that was called Israel, and still is to this day, the Jewish people. And one of their neighboring nations, ancient Israel, one of their neighboring nations with whom they frequently fought were the descendants of Esau, a nation that was called Edom. So as the Israelites are hearing this story, when they get to this part here, when God makes this statement to Rebekah, they're hearing themselves in this story. This story is giving the explanation for their conflict between themselves and Edom, and it's giving a justification for Israel being dominant over Edom. Israel winning against Edom most of the time. It's because of what we see here. But what we also see here that is critical, looking just at the humans, the actual individuals, Jacob and Esau, that are at the heart of this story, is we're seeing that the whole Jacob story here is driven by a power struggle between Jacob and Esau that is literally from the womb. Where it says here in the New International Version, at least in the 1984 edition, the babies jostled each other within her. That is nowhere near a strong enough translation. The word that's there means every other place it appears in the Old Testament in Hebrew, crushed. The babies crushed each other inside her. I mean, like, they were going after it. Like, this is not just normal, like, active kid, you know. There are some babies that when they're in the womb, man, they're all over the place, right? And sometimes like at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know. And others are more passive, you know. And here we've got two twins, but they are really going after it. Like, it was probably causing literal physical pain to Rebekah how much they were wrestling with one another. Of course, at that point, she doesn't know yet that they're twins, right? They didn't have ultrasounds back then. I mean, she doesn't know they're twins in there until God tells her. God tells her that this is what's going on. And so we see this power struggle where you've got literally, like, from conception, you have these two brothers that are crammed in this space, and both of them want all of it. And they're not inclined to share it with one another. You know, each of them wants to be dominant over the other, and they're stuck together, and they can't get apart. And honestly, in families, this is how family is, even if you're not a twin. In fact, for that matter, even if you don't have any siblings, but especially if you do. And it's certainly true for spouses as well. When you become a family, you're locked in with one another, and you can't get apart. I mean, you can't. I mean, even when you get older, when you grow up, you can move away from home, you can move across the country, you can set up your own life, you can be, you know, as distant as you want to be as far as the level of contact that you have. You know, you could come back to visit frequently, you could come back to visit rarely, you could talk on the phone frequently, you could do it rarely, you could have long conversations or short conversations. You know, you can regulate that how you want, but no matter how far you get away, even to the point of, I'm just not even going to talk at all, you can never get away from family. You can't. Because it's in you. You can't forget. And we're actually going to see here the story of Jacob, that there are times that he gets away, but he can't get away. No matter how far he gets away, he can't get away. So you have these boys here, and there's this power struggle between them, and that is setting the stage for everything that is to come. Now, before they were born, we see that Isaac prayed for a baby. Isaac was in this situation much like his father was, Abraham. Abraham had this wife, Sarah, who, as I said, she could not get pregnant. And so it was a miracle of God. It was a divine, supernatural intervention of God that Sarah got pregnant at the age of 90. It is a miraculous thing. And Isaac was born. Well, Isaac now is in the same situation, or a similar situation, where his wife also is not getting pregnant, is not having a baby. He is in the same situation of having these promises, you know, having the promise that there's going to be many descendants, that they're going to possess the land where Isaac is living as a wanderer, as a nomad, as a guy living in tents with huge flocks and herds, where he's not one of the settled people. He's not living in a city. He's not living in a farm. He's just kind of sort of being tolerated, put up with. by the neighbors there, by the people who actually are settled there, as a sort of moving, roving city or power center himself, as he has, lots of silver, lots of gold, lots of flocks, lots of herds, lots of slaves, servants, hired men, he's just moving around, but it's still not his, and he's still saying, if God is going to do what he promised my father that he would do, what he promised me that he would do, we've got to have kids. We don't have kids. We don't have kids. We can't have this land. We can't be the blessing to the whole world. So he cries out to God. He cries out to God. He's pleading with God, where it says in verse 21, Isaac prayed to the Lord. Again, that's not strong enough. The word there is he pled with the Lord. He was pleading with the Lord. Please, please give my wife a child. And God intervenes. God answers his plea, and his wife Rebekah becomes pregnant. So Isaac prays for this baby, and God answers. Now Rebekah is having this turmoil inside her. So she prays. She prays for an explanation. That's what we see here. She says, she's wondering, why is this happening to me? What is going on in here? So she went to inquire of the Lord. She went to seek the Lord. She went to pray to the Lord to say, Lord, give me an explanation. This does not seem right. This does not seem good. Are the babies going to die? Am I going to die? What's going to happen here? And God gives her this answer. So Isaac prays for the baby. Rebekah prays for an explanation, but neither of them prayed for what to do next. Neither of them prayed about what to do with what they got. God gives this statement, this declaration saying, you have twins that are trying to crush each other even now. And when they get older, they're going to continue to fight, and the younger one is going to dominate and subjugate the older one. So right there, they see they got a pretty big parenting challenge on their hands, right? Even if they're just going to accept this as this is what the eventual result is going to be, there still ought to be kind of the logical question is there any peaceable way to get from point A to point B? What is this going to do to our family as this goes along? But that's where the prayer stops. Now, there's danger in making an argument from silence. There's danger in saying that just because it doesn't say that they prayed means they didn't pray. However, in literature, sometimes you can make an argument from silence because there's a lot of prayer that takes place in the book of Genesis. And in fact, there's a good bit of prayer that takes place just here in a few verses. But we don't see any human being praying to God for about the next 5, 6, 7 chapters. The next time somebody prays to God, it is Jacob, grown up, having experienced a lot of stuff, praying to God when he's alone and his back is against the wall and he thinks he could be a dead man in the morning. That's the next time we see somebody praying to God. So what we're going to see for the next several weeks is a whole lot of people trying to manage stuff based on their own wisdom without asking God for help. And that's going to explain a lot of what we see here. And what I want to press on you today, just sort of to pause here in the middle of the story, to give you some counsel and some advice, is whatever blessing you're praying for, pray even harder for the ability to handle that blessing. I don't know what you're praying for today. For some of you, I know what you're praying for because you tell me this. But in general, I don't know what you're praying for today. But you're probably praying for something. Actually, if you're not praying for something, let me encourage you to pray for something. We should start there. If there's something going on in your life that you think life would be better if, life would be better if I had this, or life would be better if I didn't have that, or life would be better if this loved one that I had this or didn't have that, or whatever. Whatever it is that you desire, pray for that. Ask God for that. He wants you to come to Him. He wants you to ask Him for it. He's a good Father that way. Jesus says, if you fathers yourself, if your son comes to you and says, can I have a snack? Are you going to give him a rock? Are you going to give him a scorpion? No, you're not going to do that. So if you people, Jesus says, being evil, yep, he calls them evil, he calls us evil. If you people being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him? right? So God wants you to come to him and ask for these things. But whatever it is that you're asking for, also ask for the ability to handle that blessing. If you're asking for a new job, ask God for the ability to handle the consequences of that job. If you're asking for children yourself, ask God for the ability to handle the consequences of having children. If you're asking God for a spouse, ask God for the ability to be able to be married to that spouse. You know, things can seem easy, things seem hard now, but things will get easier if we have this thing. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe things get harder if you have that thing that you're asking for. And also, let me suggest, don't pray alone. Get a prayer partner. You know, a disciple of Jesus supports friends in need. And you need a prayer partner for them and for you. A prayer partner is somebody that you pray for daily and you touch base with weekly. And there's nothing magic in it. It's not like it says in the Bible someplace, you know, thou shalt have a prayer partner. You know, I'm not saying that. It's not at that level. But I'm just saying that is a practice that many Christians have engaged in through time, and it's been worthwhile. You know, it's been valuable. It's been a way to support other people and to become more Christ-like in helping others. And it builds our own character in that way and builds our own hope and perseverance. But it also is something that then helps us as there's somebody praying for us. And so whatever it is that you're praying for, pray for the ability to handle that blessing and do it with somebody else. Because Isaac and Rebekah's lack of preparedness would have profound results in their sons. We see it first off in the names, especially in Jacob's name. See, back in those days, and I guess it's still somewhat true here in our day and age, but less so, back in those cultures, there were some names that were just sounds. You know, just like our names, by and large, are sounds. I mean, we can go back and we can find, you know, the deeper meaning or original meaning in ancient languages underneath, you know, our various names. And there are name books that describe that or whatever. But basically, in our culture, when we pick a name, it's because it sounds good. We just like how it sounds. Or it was a name that was given to somebody else that we want to honor. Something like that. Well, in those days, they had names like that too. But they also did a lot of naming that was labeling. You know, like if you have a jar and you're putting a label on it, you know, to say what's in the jar, right? What is contained in this jar? You know, I canned something. What is inside it? Well, let me write on the outside, out the side of the jar, you know, apple butter, you know, something like that. I got to write on the jar what is contained inside the jar. When they would give names, sometimes they would be effectively writing on the jar what's in the jar. So they'd be making a label of what is inside this person, of what this person is about. So what do they name Jacob? So Esau comes out. He's got red hair all over his body. They call him Esau, which sounds similar to the name hairy. It might mean hairy. It might not. So it might mean hairy, but it also might be one of those that the name is just a sound. We're not totally sure. But then Jacob comes out. When Jacob comes out, so when Esau comes out, he comes out of the womb, there's a hand grabbing onto his heel. And so when Jacob is born, he's given the name heel grabber. That's what Jacob means. Yaakov means he grabs the heel. Now, that might seem like a fairly innocent name, you know, or it might sound a little bit like, you know, an American Indian name, right? You know, dances with wolves, grabs the heel, kicking bird, you know, this kind of thing, if you remember that Kevin Costner movie way back. But it means something extra if you understand a little bit about the Hebrew language or the Hebrew idiom for this sort of thing. If I'm walking, if you're walking, and I take a step, when I'm taking a step, the part of my body that is furthest to the rear is my back heel, right? My heel is the part that is the furthest to the rear of my body. So, the heel is the spot that is most vulnerable. It is the most difficult to defend. If I'm walking this way, I'm not expecting that anything is going to hit me back there. And if anything did, I'm not able to defend myself. And therefore, to grab the heel for an ancient Israelite means to ambush somebody. when they're not expecting it, coming up from behind, at their most vulnerable point, at their moment of greatest weakness. And the fact that you're able to get there by coming behind is probably because the person turned their back on you because they trust you. Because you're a trusted person that would not be expected to be a threat. Therefore, heel grabber in Hebrew is like backstabber in English. It's the same sort of meaning. So Isaac and Rebekah, so Jacob is literally, not figure of speech, he is literally grabbing the heel of Esau when Esau comes out. And so his parents name him heel grabber. His parents named him backstabber. Now you got to be aware of this as we go for these next weeks through the book of Genesis. Every time you see the name Jacob, you're seeing the name backstabber. This is what the guy is called. This is what other people call him. This is what he is known as. This is the label on his jar. I mean, think about how profound that is. I mean, the names that parents give their children have a powerful impact. The labels that we give our kids have a powerful impact. The labels that your parents put on you growing up had a powerful impact on you. And sometimes we give those names thoughtfully, and sometimes we give those names not thoughtfully. And I'm not just talking, of course, about the names like on the birth certificate. I'm talking about the ways that we describe our kids. My son is this, my daughter is that, you are a blank. And those names can be blessings and they can be curses. And Jacob is living this life where he's growing up seeing himself as a born backstabber. The second place where Isaac and Rebekah's lack of preparedness had profound results on their sons, we see in verses 27 and 28. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country. In other words, an outdoorsman. While Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. And that word quiet there probably means refined. You know, he was a refined man. You know, he was an indoors, civilized kind of fellow. So they're very, very different in personality, very, very different in their interests, very, very different in just how they were. But then we see verse 28, Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, let's not overdraw the word love there, because in ancient Hebrew, they use the same word to mean love or like, okay? So it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, Isaac loved Esau like he didn't care if Jacob was alive or dead. That's probably not true. And it's not like Rebekah loved Jacob but didn't care if Esau was alive or dead. That, you know, I don't think that's it. But it definitely means that they may have loved both of their sons, but they had clear preferences as to who they liked. Rebekah liked Jacob. Isaac liked Esau. In other words, like voluntarily, if they could choose, they would want that one. The other one, well, we hope he does well, but, you know, he's not the one we would pick. And they're picking separate ones. Why are they playing favorites? It's not totally clear. We do have some indications here based on personality, but the result is that the conflict between Jacob and Esau in the womb serves as a proxy war for Rebekah and Isaac as they grow up. In other words, it would appear, and we see some more confirmation of this based on what we see next week, that there was already conflict of some sort for some reason or reasons between Isaac and Rebekah in their marriage. There was something going on in Isaac and Rebekah's marriage that they had issues that were unresolved and unsettled. We don't really see what they are, but we see that then they're using their sons to sort of fight out this war between the two of them. Rather than deal with their own issues between the two of them, they're using their kids to get an advantage one over the other and to compete that way. Now, of course, these boys, as they're growing up, they don't know this. They're not thinking this through. But they're part of it, and they're playing the game. They're engaging in it without realizing that this is what they're doing. And what happens then is that each son takes on the worst characteristic of the parent who preferred him. and this becomes evident in the first interaction between them as adults that we read about in verses 29 through 34. So once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." And that is why he was called Edom, as sort of a nickname. Edom is related to the word meaning red. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. We learn about Isaac, verse 28, that he had a taste for wild game, that he liked to have, game dinners, right? He liked this, right? He liked to do that. He liked that food a lot. And he liked Esau because Esau could get it for him, okay? Now, one would hope that he liked Esau for other reasons as well, but it comes right out and says here in the text, of anything that the storyteller, the author, Moses, as he's telling the story, might have written down or might have said, he goes out of his way to point out that Isaac really liked to eat certain food, and this is why he likes that son. Now, what we see here from Isaac is that although Isaac had many great personal qualities, one personal quality that was not so good is apparently he was significantly driven by his stomach. He was driven enough by his stomach, he was driven enough by physical craving that he's willing to favor and give special attention to one son simply because he gets him food. And we see in Esau that characteristic taken to an extreme, right? Because Esau is out hunting, he comes in, he is faint with hunger, okay? He probably went out hunting, tried to, and hunting for him could have meant, I'm traveling for several days. Like, I'm just going out for several days and I'm going to see what I can get. And he comes back, and he hasn't gotten anything, and he's starving. He's feeling faint, like he's really not feeling well at all. He sees the stew that Jacob is cooking. He says, "Give me some of that stuff now. I am starving." Jacob, plays this game with him and is trying to bargain with him and to get Esau to pay his privilege as firstborn. So in other words, as firstborn, getting the bulk, the lion's share of the property when their father dies, but then also inheriting this whole blessing that God has given to Abraham and then has been passed down to Isaac and is going to be passed down to Esau. Jacob says, "I want that in exchange for this soup right here." Now, Esau is thinking through, kind of, and he says, "Look, hey, if I'm dead, the birthright's not going to be any good for me anyway, so let me just go ahead and take this." He's not thinking, maybe there's somebody else in the tent here who will give me some bread, maybe if I look through some stuff, I might be able to find something to munch on. He's not thinking that, and so he just goes ahead and says, "Fine, here, you can have my privilege as firstborn, and I'll eat this stew." Maybe he was thinking, he can't possibly be serious. But he actually goes as far as to swear it, to make a sacred oath. At Jacob's insistence, "I solemnly swear that when the time comes, you, Jacob, will have the privilege of being the firstborn, even though I'm the firstborn." Okay? And it says in the last line, so Esau despised his birthright. He was so fixated on his physical needs right now, he couldn't say no to those for a few minutes more, but he would rather give up his entire future and all of the blessing that God might give him, all of the future that he might have for right here, right now, what I want. Esau takes the worst characteristic of his father. Jacob, meanwhile, takes the worst characteristic of his mother. We don't really see that in this passage, but next week we'll see where Jacob learned what he to do what he did in this passage right here. His mother Rebekah was deceitful and manipulative. And Jacob finds a way to grab his brother's heel. He finds his opportunity to stab his brother in the back. When his brother is most vulnerable, when his brother is most weak, in an issue where he knows his brother is least able to say no, that's where Jacob's going to strike. Goodness knows how long Jacob is thinking, why in the world did he come out of the womb before me? We were both in there. It could have been either one of us. We were wrestling for 9 months as to who was going to get out first. He just happened to be in front at that particular moment. I was this close. And now, what am I going to get? What's going to be left for me? So now here's this opportunity. I'm going to grab it. He actually says multiple times when he says, first sell me your birthright. Swear to me first. It's right now. Right now. Give it to me right now. Don't make a promise that maybe we'll negotiate the birthright later. Right now, you give it to me, you make an oath, you swear it, we'll get it notarized, and then I will give you the stew. This is the guy. This is the guy that God had planned was going to become the next person to inherit the blessing and the job of blessing the entire world and introducing the entire world to the living God. And when you look at him, you think, this dude's a jerk. But you also see that to a certain degree, he's set up for a fall. I mean, he is being formed and conditioned in this family situation that is not good. And this is the starting point that we need to see today of how God could take someone like this from a family like this and grow him into a great man. Because we're people who our starting point might look a lot like Jacob's possibly. But God can grow us into a great person too. Now, as you read this story, as you look at the story, you might feel like Isaac and Rebekah today. You might be thinking about your own family. You might be thinking about your own kids. Or you might be thinking about something else, like you might be thinking about your job, that you worked so hard to get this opportunity, to get this job, and now you're finally in this job, and things are falling apart all around. And you see how you've blown it and screwed it up. You might be in a position where you're experiencing the results of not praying for the ability to handle the blessing that God had for you. And you may indeed have responsibility for the situation you're in. You may indeed have caused problems that you're in right now that you can't go back and undo. But God does not want you to wallow in that, because there's encouragement for you today. First of all, when you're dealing with people, and especially when you're dealing with kids, it is possible to ask, to pray to God for advice and to do all the right things and still face heartache. In the book of Judges, later on here in the Bible, there's a guy named Manoah who had a wife who couldn't have kids. And an angel of God told Manoah's wife, you're going to have a son, and he's going to do great things. And when Manoah finds out that this has happened, he actually prays to God and asks, God, please send the angel back again to tell us how we're supposed to raise this child. And the angel comes back again and says, here's how you're supposed to raise the child. And the child was born, and his name was Samson, and he was an even bigger jerk than Jacob. And he did do great, great things, but he was a mess. And so Manoah and his wife, they asked God for help. They got the help. They raised the boy as best as they knew how. And you know what? The guy was still a disaster. So sometimes this happens. Sometimes this happens with kids, right? So don't beat yourself up, because even if you had asked for the right thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that things would have worked out. But the second reason for encouragement is that God uses human failures to work his perfect destiny. He uses human failures to work his perfect destiny. When God told Rebekah, here's what's going on. You got 2 babies in your womb. They're fighting each other now. They're going to fight each other when they come out. They're going to fight each other when they grow up. And the older one is going to serve the younger one. When God said that to Rebekah, he knew what Rebekah was going to do with that information. He knew that Rebekah, rather than try to make peace, was going to take sides. and want to get in good with the one who is going to be dominant. He knew what Rebekah was going to teach Jacob to do. He knew what Jacob was going to do. He knew all of the bad, twisted stuff that we're going to see here for these next few weeks. But God is such an amazing God that not only, he does more than just, get lemons and make lemonade out of them. God intentionally uses human failures to work his perfect destiny. God takes human sin and without excusing sin, without excusing evil, he leverages it to his ultimate purpose, which is to destroy evil and sin. That is at the heart of the gospel. The heart of our faith is that God intentionally and deliberately sent his unique Son, his unique everlasting Son, to be born as a human being, to live among people who were going to kill him by hanging him on a cross. He knew that there were going to be people who would betray him, who would try him in a court that was unjust, and that would let a murderer go rather than pardon him, and would hang him on the cross, and that he would die, so that those very evil human beings could be saved by faith in Jesus. That's what God does. So as you look at your life, if you're thinking, man, I'm feeling like Isaac and Rebekah today, I have blown it, I have screwed it up, I have lost my chance. I had a chance to do something with my kids, or I had a chance to do something with my work, or I had a chance to do something with whatever, and I blew it. Fear not. God knew you were going to blow it. But God uses your failure to work out his perfect destiny, and I am telling you, you're going to see it. You're going to see it. Keep your chin up and wait and see what God is going to do to make something beautiful even out of your sin.